Splendid. So we are back for the afternoon session, November 7th for Joint Information Technology Oversight Committee. Commissioner Riley Hughes, Commissioner Harrington, Secretary Riley Hughes, and
Technology Officer Mark Holmes.
Yeah, Mark Holmes. Perfect. So we're going to start talking about the unemployment insurance program first, and then we'll go to ERP. Floor is yours.
Well, for the record, Michael Harrington, Commissioner, Department of Labor. Also in the room is our UI Director, Cameron Wood. He's also our Policy and Legislative Affairs Director. So many of you may be familiar with Cameron. He's been with the department for a while and was with Ledge Council prior. So if we have detailed questions with regards to procurement or the details of the system and also some historical events that got us to where we are today. If I can't answer them, he's happy to jump in. So as many of you know, the state for a while has looked to upgrade its UI system going back probably more than 10 years now. And we've gone through a couple different iterations that were unsuccessful for a variety of different reasons. Some vendor, some funding. But in the end, that really brought us right up to about, I think the last partnership we had ended in February of 2020. So right up to the pandemic. Sometimes there's a question of what would have happened if we had stayed with that project. We were no closer to a solution then than we are now. So we were still a year and a half or more away from a fully baked solution. So we went into the pandemic with our many-year-old mainframe that functions on Cobalt F. You all can decide what the F stands for, but it has been a challenge for a number of different reasons, as you all have heard and we've all read about in the media, but just does not lend itself to flexibility or the ability of our staff to meet the needs of the state and the public during the pandemic. And we made significant changes to the program, kind of, as one person described it, we took the genie out of the bottle when we made some changes to the system to manage the pandemic, and we will never get the genie back in. I kind of equate our mainframe to a calculator that is only right 6 out of 10 times. You just never know which are the 6 and which are the 4. So many of the functions that are performed by our program are manual or have manual verification steps in them to confirm that what is being done is accurate. But we are now at this point, and thankful to the legislature and others who have supported us in upgrading our system and looking at a solution. There were 2 different appropriations that came to the department and ADS over the past, I think, 3 years, one for 3.5 and one for 30 million. So combining those into a project, we have identified a desired vendor and looking at a solution that would be roughly around $30 million. Again, the last time the system was upgraded or implemented, I believe it was actually upgraded using the same code in the 80s, but it was initially established in the 70s, June 1970, I believe. So from this point, I know we can give you a status update, but we have identified our vendor and we're moving through the contracting process, determining liability thresholds and things of that nature, and hoping to kick off the project in the coming months. And that will really bring us into a point of what I've identified as roughly a 24 to 36 month production and deployment timeline. And that the vendor has identified, if all works out and we have an executed contract, that would put us in partnership with a vendor that has typically, when they don't have done this in other states, have broken the project into 2 phases. for everybody's general knowledge, UI has really two sides to it. The benefit side, which I think we're all familiar with, which is someone becomes unemployed due to no fault of their own, and they file and collect unemployment insurance benefits. The other side of this is the tax side. So employers pay contributions to the unemployment insurance trust fund, and that's how those benefits are funded. Those funds rest at the federal treasury, and we draw those down on a daily basis to pay benefits. But it really is the quarterly wage and contribution reports that employers file that allow us to calculate an individual's eligibility and determine their weekly benefit amount. So, if I employee work for employer B files quarterly saying this is how much I've earned in wages, and they pay a contribution on those wages. It's those wages and hours worked that we use to calculate when I file for benefits, what my benefit amount is going to be and whether I've actually met the threshold to be eligible to receive benefits. So my I don't want to say my guess, but my assertion is that the reason the vendor chooses typically to go with tax first is because that is the foundation of calculating someone's benefit. So they break it into 1 year or more rollout for the tax side, and then another year or so for the benefit side. And they've done this in a handful of other states. Some states, they do just one side of the solution, and in other states, they've done both, the tax and the benefit side. That's all I have in terms of a starting point.
You said they. Who's the they?
The vendor. And I should ask if we're at a point where we can share that. So we're in contract negotiations, so we would just prefer to keep that private.
I guess since they raised the question I raised earlier, can I tag onto that? So for the technical considerations, do you have reason to believe from the vendor that you are negotiating with that there is not a concern about the time you're going to spend in that year window where you're going to have to make the new system be able to talk to the old system while also standing up the new system to replace that other piece of that system? That is fully mitigated. You've resolved that with your vendor contracts and that the phased approach makes sense.
Go ahead. I was just going to say that is what they proposed. I would leave it to.
For the record,
Katie.
Ms. Riley, U.S. Secretary of Digital Services. We're not looking to integrate into the mainframe. So that is where this phased approach is taking. It's taking a workflow and a process and a particular requirement and onboarding that net new. So what's going to happen is the business process is going to change. We will start planning for the decommissioning process of the mainframe as we start launching phase one, but there's no integration between the mainframe and this new environment.
Okay. Thanks.
Okay. Please.
So I don't know if this is appropriate, but looking at the independent review, I have questions based on that. Is that appropriate for this? Sure. Okay. So I'm just scanning it right now, actually. So there's a note here, and this goes back to my resources question from before about the challenge of no UI or IT institutional knowledge here. So how is that going to be?
So from the business side, and I'll certainly the secretary can speak to the technical side. From the business side, we have UI historical knowledge in terms of how the program functions. I think the concern for many years has been over time we have lost folks on the technical side who know how to not only do you have to understand how the mainframe was coded, right? So you have to understand the COBOL code. You also have to understand how UI works, and you also have to understand how the code was formulated to administer this program year over year over year. Because there were little tweaks and changes that occurred from programmers in the past, and you don't always know what those are until you see the downstream effects of changes. So, but from a UI system, in terms of how we administer the program, we have institutional knowledge there. I think we also will have best practices from this vendor and other states that we're in contact with that have gone live with this vendor. We're certainly hoping to implement some process efficiencies along the way. But I think if there's a concern about pulling data and accessing the mainframe for a variety of purposes to onboard the new solution, I'd let you speak to that.
So it is these major modernization projects. I think I talked about this last time we met. It is not just a technology modernization, it's a business process modernization as well. And so we've learned a lot together over the last, let's call it 5 years with the pandemic, with the flood. We also had another opportunity. There's a lot of very motivated people, both on my staff and on Commissioner Harrington's staff, who know the work that needs to get done and are very motivated to bring this into a new system and modernize, because there's a lot of manual processes that are shared between our group. While I have staff that know how to keep the lights on today, that's what they're barely doing, is keeping the lights on, which is exactly why we're here replacing the system. Based on the technical requirements that we ran through with the vendor that we've chosen and the project team, the actual gaps that I think that we are filling is we're going to bring on a dedicated project manager and business analyst, and we're going to contract, because we want to make sure that there's no diversion on attention to this project and effort. And we're going to make sure that we focus somebody who understands the requirements that are needed and can stay on board for the duration of the project.
So it seems like time might be an enemy here. So the more time that passes, the greater the risk because of the loss of knowledge. So then that would say we have some urgency. We need to act with that. Okay.
Yes.
I have additional.
Right before you begin, you talk about bringing on project manager and analysts. Plan on doing that from in-house or outside?
Outside. Currently, our enterprise project management office is managing over 100 projects at this time. So being able to dedicate 2 folks is not realistic. So we've recognized that upfront, called it out, and that's what we're focusing on.
And the work pool that you're pulling from, are you planning a local person, or are you looking at remote work?
On-site presence is going to be a critical factor to the success of the project. That's tied to the intended outcomes here. And that's going to help us keep that accelerated timeline that we have in place too.
I got that too.
Okay, and then.
Again, that same concern, I'm worried that the approach of hiring on a hired gun to be the project manager of this is going to just exasperate or substantiate the concerns raised in this document that we have here about leadership and accountability. So have we had success with bringing on project managers from outside before? And is that a change in course since you've been receiving these concerns? Is it an adjustment that you now decided to bring on project managers from outside?
With the content that's in the IR, the interesting thing is that was conducted in March, prior to the negotiations that were underway with the contract. And it was done so prior to some of the mitigation that the team has actually already undertaken in regards to onboarding the project, finding space location. I mean, we've made a lot of headway, I would say, since March between now and then. And so there was a timing issue here. So what we did was go back and look. This was in the IR review meeting, and this is why I signed this, is that we are actually looking to do another IR mid-project before we kick off phase 2. We need to make sure that we are on track and getting done what we need to do. And whether or not the IR is the traditional IR or if it's just an audit assessment of the project itself, because this is a short time frame. And it's a short timeline. The resourcing thing that you're reading through here, there was one where the agency director who was supporting VDOL left. And there was a concern within that week where those interviews were taking place that institutional knowledge would go. And I mean, you can speak to that, but we've replaced that individual with somebody who also has the institutional knowledge, and they've been able to fill that gap. So it's that point in time record that doesn't actually show the reality.
Oh, that was my question.
Yeah.
Yes. So again, the IT director at the time had actually worked for the unemployment insurance division many years in the past, helped code some of the mainframe, helped build the current claimant portal, and has been somebody, not often, but we've been able to reach out to if something confounds us and we get stuck. I think that's happened maybe once or twice. So, but in general, I think we're able to manage the system as it is right now without any concern. To the senator's point, the piece I would also add is our biggest challenge right now is staffing across the board. And I don't think that surprises anybody. So I think it's one of the challenges we have at the department. It's my biggest concern when we get to this, when we talk about the project, is having enough dedicated staff to the project and still be able to run the unemployment insurance system and deliver the program in a way that our customers expect. I also know it's one of the biggest challenges, not to speak for you, but I know it's a challenge that ADS faces as well. It's also part of the reason why we're looking at other contracted support as well. I don't have the same concern that you shared in terms of creating more of an issue with an outside project manager. We have used outside project managers in the past. We still have our leadership team, our project leadership team, and the various sponsors and leads that would make the decisions on the project. The project manager really is there to guide us, make sure we stay on task, we're meeting up our objectives, our goals, and ensures that not only we, but the contractor are sticking to the project plan. So again, I don't have the same concern in terms of if we go with an outside project manager that we're somehow losing control of the project.
So just maybe this will be helpful for me just to kind of fact check a few things that I wasn't aware of with independent review. So I think I heard you just say, Secretary Riley Hughes, that this independent review was done in March. The report is dated for September. So is that typical?
No.
Okay, I'd love to hear more about that. Also, this independent review cost close to $1 million. This is what I believe I read, no? Okay.
Definitely not.
Okay, I will come back to that.
They typically run a
The Barry Dunn services.
They typically run, I think, 25 or less,
25, yeah.
but they do a series of reviews for.
Remaining costs are for ADS services under acquisition cost assessment. So yes, I just want to clear this up for myself because I read this. What? 1.2 disposition of independent review deliverables. First line, first block here. Talks about Barry Dunn's independent review services totaling $998,929. Happy to take that answer somewhere else, but I'm just trying to understand my bigger picture questions are really around the process. So 6 months. How much does this
No, they're
cost?
talking about it being ADS services at most services, what the estimate in the project was for project management, enterprise architecture.
Great,
Yeah.
thank you.
Section,
I know, sometimes it cannot be as clear, but
section 50 at the very bottom of the cost, it says 24/5.
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay.
Since we're on a recording, would you mind, Sarah?
My name is Lisa Goff and I'm the GMO IT consultant for the record.
Thank you.
Can you speak to the 6 months, whether that's typical or not typical, the March to September?
so only having been enrolled for a brief time and IRs are signed up by the CIO, just over a month. No, from my experience, that's not typical. Given the time frame that wasn't called out as a risk. It was a discussion point that we had in the IR review meeting, that progress had been made and there was a request to update the document based on the progress that was made. The content and the outcome doesn't change if we were to have them rewrite it. The risks that they identified were ones that we recognized and accepted. It was just there was some language in there. The interviewer also no longer works for Barry Dunn, from my understanding either. So no, not typical, but doesn't change the outcome, which is why we move forward with it.
Okay. Okay. But we heard you talk about, my first
Progress that
question.
had happened.
Yeah, my first question around losing that institutional knowledge, but that was at that moment and not now. So, I mean, how much of the value diminishes over time with independent
If you
reviews?
look at it as being a very low risk, it wasn't something that we looked at in the review, in the IR review as being a concern. And that was addressed by the members that attended as well.
We look at what is being low risk, sorry.
The individual who no
Oh.
longer works for ADS.
Okay,
So the risk register does rate the risk on scales. So high risk, medium risk, low risk, that was not a high risk item.
okay, got it. My question was more around 6 months from start to delivery. What gets lost? Do things get lost in that period in terms of validity?
In this particular one, I would say no.
Okay.
It is not typical, no. We'd like to see that window shortened.
Okay.
It wasn't ideal, but the outcome is still the same.
Okay. And was there an explanation for why have 6 months?
I'm looking
I
at
don't recall.
Cameron because he was part of the review team. My understanding is it wasn't, if I remember back now, it wasn't the actual review that took a long time, but there was a back and forth between the review in draft form, the agency, the department, before the review was actually finalized, and a disaster in there as well. So,
So the flooding.
yeah.
Okay, that seems like a good explanation. The second question, talking about there'd be an impact on net operating risks going forward and no break-even point. What does that mean?
From the business side, there's no break even.
Save anything?
I think that if I'm reading what they put in here, the concern is that there's this assumption that you update a system and somehow it costs less because you've modernized. And the fact is, when you're running a 50-year-old system and you update, it's not going to cost less. And so there was a conversation we've been having on our end to say, listen, we can implement a new system and we can remove all of the current costs associated with the old system. At the end of the day, it's still going to cost us more to operate the new system than it did the old system.
So is that like,
And so, yeah, there's no point where we can say all of this becomes net neutral when we offload the old system and have the new system. But I think we've also, from the business side, have identified ways, and the administration has supported us in saying, we understand it's going to cost more to operate the system, to have regular maintenance and service agreements and so forth.
Yeah, and I would say that when you own a system for 50 plus years, you've already paid for that asset over time. And so that's why with those costs factored in, if we were to look at the 50-year costs over time, sure, but there's also some business costs that are associated here that aren't factored into the technology costs. So you have operating costs that make a big difference. There's also a time frame too. If the call center is only open from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. Monday through Friday, then we're not servicing during after hours. So turning on this system opens the door to now be 24/7. We are doing manual people business process, and similar to what you heard Garth talk about, there's a major human component to this and a major operational organizational change component too. So that isn't factored into the IR because when you look at the IT mod funds, it's the technology side, But there's an effort underway that Commissioner Harrington is working on that does speak to the business process optimization side and the change management that's going to have to take place within UI because they won't be so manual anymore.
I also think, and that's not to say I don't expect us as a division to downsize we kind of run on a skeleton crew as one of the smallest states in the country, operating one of the smallest UI programs in the country. There are federal requirements that have to happen regardless. And so when you kind of operate at that base level, you can't really go smaller. But I think the new system, it certainly provides us a more stable solution and also provides us a good example of this is, where during another influx of claims or an added issue like fraud, where maybe in the past we would have had to create a new unit within the program or implement, new staff augmentation. We're able to handle that volume and those changes in a different way.
And then I guess at the end of this, there are two risks that are identified in another key issue. Cost to administer the new system might exceed funding allocations and the administrative budget for additional costs is number one.
Yep.
Number two, VDOL and ADS might not have the necessary resource availability to address project requirements within the expected project timeline. So how are you, what is the view on those? So
the cost piece will be something that I think has to be addressed over time. I think we are very heartened by the current negotiations because I think what we will see is, at least for the immediate post go live, so for the first 5 years, potentially those costs will be relatively manageable. I don't know what will happen to those costs beyond the 5 years because we'll have to eventually either renegotiate the contract or, look for another solution. And I'm not saying we would, it's just, we'll have to assess that at that point. But we've added some funds to our base funding for the UI program specific to modernization. And those will eventually go towards additional costs related to the program. So during the program period, we're using those funds for staff augmentation to backfill positions for individuals who move over to the project. When the project goes live and we're no longer doing staff augmentation, those costs will help defray the ongoing maintenance and service costs of the new system.
okay, so I'm hearing a 5-year contract, initial contract.
Typical. I mean, I think we haven't signed off on it, but I think that's typically what we would look for. And again, I say that as it's not it doesn't completely mitigate the issue, but it certainly puts us in a place where I'm much more comfortable, at least within that first contract period, of what those costs are. They're known or they will be known. And I think we're going to be able to meet that need.
And how about resource availability for project requirements within the expected project timeline, noting that we said the longer this goes on, the greater the risk is, and also noting that we already have in state government challenges with workforce. So what are you doing for this specific?
So we do have plans to augment the staff. We will, especially related to this project, probably bring on additional limited service positions as needed. Well, the reason I say that is we haven't executed the contract, so I don't know the timeline. So more or less, I'm saying when we get to that point, we will need to bring on more staff. We have an initial allocation of just a few individuals that we're recruiting for. Again, the biggest concern is finding the talent. It's not getting the positions, although, that is its own challenge, but it's not insurmountable. The big one is finding people. So when we talk about needing to put our best and our brightest on the project to get the best bang for our buck in terms of the best system in the end. It's also figuring out how do we backfill when we lose that subject matter expertise on the program side. So we are actively recruiting on a regular basis, but it has been the biggest challenge. I think we'll have to figure out when we talk about mitigation, what is the bare minimum that need to be on the project. If we're comparing this project to other state projects and in talking with the vendor, the draw on staff hopefully will not be as significant as it has been in other states. They believe that being a smaller project essentially than like maybe a larger state, that we won't have to dedicate the large number of staff that other states have had to the project. I think then we'll have to figure out, and there are different possibilities, whether we're talking about contracted support or not, but we'll have to figure out if we can't fill those.
Contracted support is an option, or
I don't know. I mean, I say that in the sense that comes with added cost. It comes with added challenges. We all lived through the contracted support we had during the pandemic, so it would not be my first recommendation. I'd rather identify state talent that we can onboard and put on, backfill project staff. That's the number one priority for me. But it's also, we're not at that point until we've executed the contract and we know what the timeline is. A little bit of the benefit or, silver lining is that we will execute the contract and, whether it ends up being 10 or 15 state staff, they don't all need to jump on the project day one. It will depend on the functionality being built and tested at the time. And there will be a ramp up of bringing on project staff from the vendor and then bringing our staff in. And we may have 2, 3, 4, 5 people roll onto the project and then a new set of 2, 3, or 4, 5 people and other people rolling off depending on the functionality that's being built at the time. So in the preliminary conversations we've had with the vendor, I think there are ways to mitigate so we don't end up having to say we need to find 10 or 15 people to move to the project and then we have to try to backfill 15 positions.
okay, here's my last question for each of you. With this specific project, what are you worried about the most?
At this point, for me, it's staffing. And knowledgeable staff. I mean, it's not just about finding a warm body. We're going to take our best customer service representative and move them to the project. And then we need to backfill that person on our call lines who can answer questions about complex claims, right? So that's where, as a division that has roughly 80 full-time employees, when you take 5, 10 away, and you're taking your we also had a lot of turnover post-pandemic, as you can imagine. So the number of subject matter experts that have, 10 plus years of experience within the division are not, there's not a plethora of them. So staffing and knowledgeable staffing is the biggest one for me.
The unknown unplanned disaster is going to be my biggest concern because that would put a halt to this project entirely. We would not have the resources to be able to handle a disaster mid-flight. We'd have to pull everybody out the project and address it, which is what we dealt with in July. We did it quick. We brought in resources from outside of VDOL. But it's an unplanned risk. We just don't know.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Talking about biases. Who's money?
There were 2 appropriations, one for 3.5. I believe that was in, oh boy, Lisa probably knows. It's the FY21 maybe or 22, and then another $30 million appropriation. And that will support both the actual solution and the ancillary costs with that, so.
So that will be it to get you through getting this up and running and covered all the expenses up until this point. There was, my understanding was that a portion of this was going to be paid for out of COVID funds.
There was a point where there was a conversation about ARPA funds, and I think there were other conversations through appropriations and others about shifting those funds due to the deadline on the expenditure of those funds. So I just, at this point, I know it started out as relief fund. What's that?
Congressional budget here. My understanding had an impact that certain funds, if they weren't appropriated at that point, were going to be clawed back. And did that have an effect on you?
No, I think at that point, my understanding is based on from one year to the next, there was a shift in where the funding, how the funds were appropriated. And so they shifted to a mechanism that didn't expire and didn't risk the loss of those funds.
Now, you've been negotiating with a vendor. You've got the review done at this point, and that's complete. Is that correct? When do you anticipate a contract being signed?
I think we would have had one prior to this, but that the secretary brought up, the flood really threw everything into, pause or hiatus. Originally we were hoping for September, and with the flood in July, that pushed everything about 3 months. So I would say by the end of the year is our goal, with kickoff being in the early part of the new year.
And I would note, based on the memo provided by Lisa Gavin, that we ensure that we can get the contract reviewed prior to signature as what was required and asked for, so that we can not delay anything.
If I heard correctly, you had mentioned that somehow we would be spending less because we were a smaller state. And is there anything that we do less than a larger state as far as unemployment is concerned?
I would say some of it is volume and some of it is size of the division, right? So a lot of the functions remain the same. Some states have more complex state laws. Some have less. We kind of fall in the middle. But when we look at the amount of claimants we serve on an annual basis and the number of staff that are managing the system, I think that's where you would see a change in cost. And again, it comes down to I think the vendor also recognizing in terms of a state's ability to pay for a solution. And if they really want to work with the state and grow their footprint, they also recognize what, at the end of the day, we based our recommendation to the governor and to the legislature on the cost of a system based on what recent costs for system replacements had been. But at the end of the day, the vendors chose to bid on that project. So, but you can look at, and I think whether it was in the independent review or Lisa's memo, I don't remember which one, but there's a comparison of other states. And you can see where some states are significantly more, sometimes double or beyond that than what Vermont is. But I think when we talk about cost, some of it's the production lift, but a lot of it is going to be the users, the claimants coming through the door, the number of employer files that are filing on a quarterly basis. When you talk about, Vermont compared to California, right, or New York.
Really thinking about system development costs as opposed to operating costs.
Yeah. So again, I think the development, the functionality is the same. Again, but some of it is on a much broader scale. In terms of the amount of data you're transferring, the amount of data you're storing. So I think it's some of those ancillary costs.
And you obviously selected the vendor at this point. Is that name public yet or not until the contract is written?
It's mentioned in the IR, but it is based on us not having a signed contract. We're considering it still open RFP.
Yeah, so we identified our preferred vendor, and then it will be a selected vendor and announced when we actually have a contract agreement.
Lisa, was there anything you wanted to add, or?
Just again, reiterating that my interim update was based on the independent review only. I submitted a bunch of questions to them and they will get back to me, I think by Friday ideally, and that's the question, I don't know. And then just let the process work its way out. And I will complete my independent review and let you know when I'm ready. So the committee can, I think they have to meet and review it and decide whether to release the funds.
Is that likely to be by December 5th or more likely to be come session?
I think, I mean, if I can get the responses to my questions, it can be done by December.
Okay. And would you expect ADS to be asking for the release of the funds by December 5th or waiting until session?
That is a goal that we have been targeting. Yes,
Wait.
that we would have it for December 5th for request. Yes.
Any other questions on UR? Commissioner, thank you.
Okay, always a pleasure. Thank you for having us. Happy to come back.
Okay. With that, I guess the switch over.
Got the seat more.
Well, it's the secretary's seat. So,
I'm going to stick with the rolling.
yeah, it's much more comfortable.
More comfy. Yeah.
Yes.
But I said more comfy, not just comfy.
So I know I have not had an opportunity to come to this committee and speak about the change in leadership within ADS and the focuses that we're driving towards. And I think in the earlier testimony that you heard around IE&E, the alignments there are very similar and focused. And the same is applying on the UI side and all of the IT modernization projects. It's looking at this as a people first approach and also recognizing that there is going to be a increasing need for business process change and change management in order to make this effective. That this is not, you can't just plug in a technology project or product and expect that it's going to change everything, that we really have to go through the necessary motions to make sure that the business can optimize alongside the technology. I would say, as I'm starting to do analysis on the upcoming and the active projects, it may be an area that we don't have as much attention on. So it's something that I'm going to continue driving and focusing towards, similar to the Commissioner Harrington's conversation. He's looking to do a lot of that effort with his internal budget, which is great. But it wasn't something that when we looked at IT mod funds that we were looking to build into the IT modernization project. So it is something that I'm hoping that this committee will see moving forward, is that we're going to look more towards those, the business impact and the business costs and the operating costs holistically beyond just ADS. There are 4 components to what we're driving towards, or what I'm driving towards within ADS as we look to mature as an agency. We're no longer in that startup mode. We're 6 years old now. And so we really need to focus the next 5 years around our both organizational and operational maturity. So one of the biggest focuses for us alongside what the core priorities are is the user experience. One of the things that I don't think that we talk enough about and that we don't focus enough on is that user experience, both for the state employee and for the public user. Being able to operate and integrate and access services within the government, state of Vermont government, a user shouldn't have to know which agency they're coming to. They shouldn't have to find one of the 168 websites out there to figure out which one's going to give them the information. They should go to one. And so that goal of that ease of use and the single experience for them is going to be really important moving forward. And what we're doing both in the UI space, in IE&E, and the projects that we have going on across the different agencies that ADS is supporting is driving towards that single user experience. The other part is, and this speaks really heavily towards this committee, is reducing the complexity and simplifying what it is that we're doing. We have very complex legacy, you just heard it just now, 50-plus-year-old systems out there. But we also acquired a lot of these technologies, servers, software, products 6 years ago when we weren't ADS. And we still own a lot of that and it's still operational. And we really need to look at driving down that technical debt. and simplifying the footprint, which also reduces the security vulnerabilities as well. Standards is another key area of focus, that if we were to deliver core baseline enterprise services, what those services are should be expected across state government. There shouldn't be any surprises. It should be predictable. And so that's the last piece, is the predictability. How do we make technology predictable for the user community, our partners in state government, and the Vermont public? So that's a heavy lift, but I think it's a good segue into some of the outstanding things happening with ERP, some of the history that I'm coming into brand new. So I will apologize in advance. I may not have all the answers to your questions, but looking at ERP specifically as a single platform that can drive automation and simplicity for Vermont users and for agency integration across government is going to be really critical, because I think what we have today is not that. We have disparate systems, and we have a lot of third-party systems that are not accounted for in the technology that we consider ERP today, that we need to look at turning off as we onboard this new ERP system that are actually in active procurement on the implementation side today. So I wanted to just kind of give a high-level overview there around those key focuses. I heard earlier questions regarding procurement, regarding technology choice, and I'm happy to answer the questions that I can answer. We have a procurement that was made under a particular technology that is a separate licensed contract that we have in place today that's active. We also have the implementation services that we are under active RFP on today that we do not have a signed contract for, that I think that a lot of the forward on work and the basis behind the IT modernization funds was really about the implementation side holistically. So I'm not sure if you have anything to add as our CTO, who has been here for the greater part of the 6 years.
Yep. So for the record, I'm Mark Combs. I'm the Chief Technology Officer for ADS, and I have been here since just after the formation of ADS in this role, and can speak to a little bit of the history. The ERP system, as the Secretary was saying, is really more than what I've heard us talk about in the past. It's more than vision, and it's more than the VTHR HR system. It's really anything that we do across the state that manages some form of capital. We have done today across the state, I think there's 14 major systems that we have that would be classified as ERP. And that's after some of those consolidations that we did for vision, about a couple decades ago. So we're still in a space where I think today we have not only processes that are inefficient and spend on IT that's unjustified, we also could be doing a lot more and a lot better for that end user experience, which what the Secretary is talking about. It's reconciling money that flows across 14 different systems is not going to be a good user experience for anybody. So that's a key point. The other thing, this is really kind of a ball that ADS picked up when we were formed. If we get we didn't put it up because we handed it everybody just 2 or 3 slides, but in 2015, prior to the formation of ADS, to some of the questions that I think Lisa is going to be asking us, where did you gather requirements and how do they get gathered? So in 2015, we consulted with an outside company to come in, and they at that time did a what if we consolidated all finance, and they came up with a 4,800 or so requirements that we captured. They fall into 37 major business areas, and we have them today as a traceability matrix so we can fall back to them anytime we need to. We subsequent to that And at the time, with the systems we have today, even back then, we were hearing that, hey, this is the really kind of end date for this platform. We're moving out to the cloud, as it were, right? And so that's really kind of what prompted a lot of this effort, because the systems we had were great. We did need to consolidate, but at the same time, we were looking to, okay, what's the best platform, given that, the systems we've heard today are not going to be available to us, that we have today are not going to be available to us. So we then subsequently hired KPMG, and this was really a deliverable that came about just as ADS was formed. And they looked at those requirements that had been gathered in 2015 and came back and said, okay, really at this point in time, the world is moving to this cloud environment. Like, they looked at what we had spent over the decades on software updates and version updates on our code, and the reconfiguring of the code, and how much that took every time there's a new set of tax laws that come out or anything else. And they said, really, this is the benefit of moving to the cloud. Everybody's on the same code base. You don't have these expensive software upgrades. Look for a cloud vendor, for us for ERP. We went back to our existing vendor and said, okay, we've been told we really want to be moving into the cloud. Do you have a product? And can you get us there? No, not at this time. So that's what prompted the next phase, which was the RFIs and RFPs for VTHR. And I think, Lisa, you spoke about this in the earlier testimony, saying that there had been an RFP that from VTHR that did not get awarded. And the reason for that is during the scoring of that RFP, we had 6 respondents, I should say. We had 6 different companies, platforms respond to that RFP. There was scoring that was done. It was leaning in one way towards one vendor. In the early conversations with them, they said, really, you're just talking about a really small slice of cloud ERP platform. And essentially, to onboard just VTHR, you're going to pay for 70 or 80% of our cloud ERP platform. So it would make more sense for you to reconsider the other ERP components of finance and budgeting, learning management, possibly procurement management, grants, as we talked about, because you can gain those capabilities for a much smaller add-on percentage. So we took those numbers, we looked at what we were spending today in cross-vision on our other systems, and we said, okay, this is clearly a heavy financial savings for us. And it does 2 things. It not only saves money, but it moves us from CapEx to OpEx for what we're spending in the ERP space. And so at that point, we looked at, and then we see here that we start talking about adding to the budget request for more than just VTHR, adding for the finance. And that took until I think this last session for us to get to a point where we had the monies secured for both. And we did, I think, as far as purchasing the licenses, the contract there, I'm not the best person to speak to what NASPO's contracts provide us and all that. So we'd happy to follow up on those. But the dollars that were spent for the procurement of those licenses, we did submit RFQs multiple times because we were, in effect, only getting back one source for those licenses each of those times, but we did submit them broadly. And what we heard from the AG is, well, we did our part. Essentially, we submitted them broadly. So any questions so far? Okay, thank you. And as the secretary was mentioning, we are in the middle of the RFP contracting or negotiations, I should say, for the implementation vendor. And I think for me as the CTO, this is really just one key platform for us. I think when I think back to where we were when we started with the Agency of Digital Services, firstly, you wouldn't have been able to ask, what are we spending on you could have asked, but you wouldn't have gotten a great answer on what are we spending on IT across the state. We started doing some inventorying initially, and we had 1,700 major business applications out there. And they fell into categories that were much smaller than 1,700. You know, in some cases, we had hundreds of the same type of application out there. So these things for us, like moving to an ERP platform, for me as a CTO, I'll tell you, moving to the cloud makes a lot of these things almost commodity in the sense that they're not running our servers. If we want to move to another platform in a year, 2 years, 5 years, we take our license or we buy subscriptions in another place and we move on. We take our data and go. We don't have the same sorts of dependencies. For example, we were talking earlier with unemployment insurance. There's no risk of what's going to take this old system here to migrate those business rules and all that. That's not our concern. We don't have those. That's a platform that we pay for via subscription.
And here we've got some risk with the staying on the current platform.
We definitely do.
Bringing their support and so forth.
Absolutely, yes. Our staff are certainly capable and in numbers.
Our current platform is past end of life.
One of the things that I think I heard was about the RFP being perhaps vague or like just generic cloud services rather than a particular goal or desire and product.
So there's two separate components. There's the purchase of the license, the subscriptions, and then there's the implementation. So we're not, unlike a lot of our systems in the past, we're not building a system this time. We're essentially onboarding to a system and just configuring it to our workflows. You know, we're adding our business rules, we're adding our points where people need to validate and all that. So we're not building something. So essentially, we purchased on one sense, very vaguely, hey, we want the modules enabled for 11,000 state employees to support these 8 different functions, high-level functions, you know, payroll and timesheets, blah, blah, blah. We asked for that at a very high level. And then for the implementation RFP, which we've submitted, that's where we get more detailed. And we ask more detailed, we have more detailed requirements that say, okay, we have no experience with, you know, this platform, and we have 11,000 state employees. They fall into this many number of, you know, labor units, and I'm not the finance person, but I'm doing my best in that. But this is what our chart of accounts looks like, roughly, blah, 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 help us onboard into the, you know, the employee management module. And we do that in a very broad sense, but there's a process that these implementers have gone through state by state that's very similar. So when they came in and they did demos for us, they were demos of their process that they're going to take us through. They're really workshops rather than demoing a finished product, because we can see the finished product ourselves anytime we want to. We just go out to the website, it's already there. What we wanted to know is, how are you going to walk us through our business cases with our peculiarities, and how would that process work? And so a lot of this implementation vendor choice is based upon what is their methodology, you know, what are they doing with their old data? How do we have access to that? Given our constraints around availability of employee resources to serve as subject matter experts and things like that, how does their process rely on them? So we've worked through a lot of those things in the choice of the implementation partner.
So, thank you. I'm responding to, you're talking about this process is past end of life at this point.
The current.
Yeah. And so I had the opportunity to say this to both of your predecessors, so I will say it to you now. I really think the administration has a responsibility to propose a sustainable, ongoing financing mechanism for IT. I mean, I think we can't possibly disagree that IT is just a part of modern life and modern government. And so we've got to figure out, and I mean, we're really fortunate with the disasters that have befallen us in terms of how old our infrastructure is. So I just hope that that's something that amongst all of your other work that you're doing here, that, you know, you keep an eye on the future for us and not letting us get in this position again. Madam Secretary.
I can assure you, that is absolutely part of my strategy, my plan, and the initiatives. And I am finding great support from the administration
Great. Thank you. Thank you.
and my staff.
Got your 6.
What's the? What's the more detailed timeline expectation? To be able to specifically, people will be able to completely deprecate the existing system.
We have, at a high level, if I can estimate what the intent would be, it's 2 years for HCM, which is the human capital management, the HR system, and 2 years for the budget and finance. There is a blend between the human capital management and the budget that will take place over the course of both. We don't have the full schedule outlined yet, obviously, because we're still in contract negotiations. So 4 years for full burn down of the current environment, which right now we're assessing cost on what the 4 years of that extended support is going to be, which right now is extremely costly. And I can't take back past years. I can't get them back in time. So that's why timing right now is really going to be critical. We can't miss these deadlines. We can't miss those timeline commitments because I don't want to go 5 years out into an extended support scenario. It is going to very similar conversation that we had with IE&E and unemployment insurance. The commitment from the partner agency users and staff who are experts in this space, who are already underwater on the resourcing side. I think that you're going to find that that's a reoccurring theme, but it can't be an excuse. We have to work to move past that because we don't have a choice here. We're already behind on this project by, I would say, maybe I won't give a time frame. Let's call it a couple years, a couple government years, right? So a known risk, and again, goes back to that point around the focus around organizational change management and change management in its entirety. I mean, we are taking manual processes and we are flipping them upside down and automating them, not because of AI, but really because of the opportunity to bring modern technology to the table. But it requires that change in business process, and that's hard for folks, and that drives a great deal of resistance, and that's not an option here. So whatever we can do on the ADS side and in working with the administration to help relieve those resistance points, that's absolutely a focus that we need to be working on. I know with the partner we're in negotiations with right now, that's built into their process. So we do need the right sponsors and resources at the table making these decisions. And with the executive steering committee that we have in place, I do have confidence that we've got the right folks at the table.
All right, again, what additional risks and I guess contingency plans would you suggest we put into place if that 4 years does creep to 5, or to make sure that it hits that?
We're going to have a lot of eyes on this and a lot of visibility. We already have our projects identified. We've had a commitment. So the Deputy Secretary of Administration left, Doug Farnham. Prior to his departure, he was able to identify additional staff recs that were available that he provided to DHR and to Commissioner Fastigi to be able to bring on 8 additional people into DHR to help with this process. So whether or not they step into the day-to-day roles or they come into the project roles is going to be her determination. But more of that is going to be important. Ensuring, like you did here, ADS, please bring your business partners to the table in, your partner agency resources. We did just that, and they're very much at the table with us in this process. So those contingency plans that we're already identifying have a lot to do with the active engagement of the steering committee, the weekly project updates that we're getting, so that there is no opportunity to say, oh, it turned red. We're in red status right now. We're off the rails. We just added 12 months to the project. That can't be an option in how we've structured the current project. This is going to be my issue to make sure that I bring my peers in leadership in our partner agencies to the table. But I don't see this as an option to move forward. We have to move forward. I do believe that we picked the right technology. I do believe that we're in negotiations with the right partner from everything that has been provided to me for information. Next month, I'll have more information for you as well. And the following month, I'm going to have more information. So I want to make sure that I provide updates to this committee so that you know what the progress is. And if we do hit those roadblocks, that it's not something that we hide, because we can't risk that in this. We have to move forward.
What next steps are you looking for from us? Anything we should be, we talked about having UI on the agenda for December. What from ERP should we plan to review between now and then, and having on the record for our next meeting?
I've been very closely involved and engaged with Lisa through this process. So what I would say is if we can request to have an update provided on the December 5th meeting, I would like to provide an update to that, because there is some activity going on with contract negotiations that we could get through to a almost prepped for signatures. I don't believe that we're going to be fully prepped for signatures by the 5th, but we can be close. But if there's any hesitations, like I said, in partnership with the Joint Fiscal Office and Lisa Govan, I think it's really important that we stay in lockstep with this so that I'm not missing anything either. And if there's any concerns coming out of the committee, that we address them immediately and it doesn't stall that potential kickoff date, which I believe that we're anticipating the same timeframe as UI being in the first of the year.
And did we discuss the independent review for this one yet, or?
I believe that the independent review is in RFP status right now.
And that would be complete signatures?
It would need to be complete before the signatures, yes.
So the December for that doesn't seem realistic if the independent review is out there. But still, I think there's things we can do upfront to sort of shorten the length after I get the independent review. And we can talk about that offline. So I think that's definitely.
Good deal. Senator, and then,
Wonder if, before we conclude our visit with the secretary, we have an brief executive session, talk about risk oversight and threat assessments.
Sure.
for December? Today. Maria, if we did a brief executive session, what's the current status of allowing Moni to listen in from Zoom?
You will first decide, the committee as a whole decides who they would like to be present in the executive session. And then I can go end the live stream. If they're members, they can stay on in Zoom, but the live stream will end.
Okay. So I think I'm hearing a motion to go to executive session for specifically for
Risk oversight and threat assessments.
cybersecurity or
Overall.
risk overall. Okay.
I'm sorry, just one more thing. If I recall last time, Evan said we could do a secure connection for the Zoom members who want to participate remotely. I don't know if we want
It's
to.
not, whether or not he can do that within an immediate timeframe, that's a real question.
I can email him right now and see if we can. Yeah.
Rip Chase, I'm okay to I have a question that wouldn't be executive question section, but I'm okay to step out of the Zoom and just get caught up, if you want to catch me up.
Okay. Go ahead with your question.
Okay, cool. Yeah, thank you, Secretary. I was just curious, so when a number of the testimonies today, the topic of workforce and having enough people who are have the expertise to actually work on a lot of these projects being a holdup. And I was just curious, like, what the current method of kind of cataloging what types of skills and employees and or gaps you have, like how that's currently being assessed, and if there's a way that we can help with if there isn't a method in place, just kind of putting that out there and wondering if there's methods to help and how you're working through that.
I can't speak to the partner agencies with the business folks. As far as ADS is concerned, we've not looked at our staff. We have an opportunity through the contracts to bring in contractors as necessary. So that would be probably more of a question that Commissioner Harrington, AHS and AOA would need to answer in regards to their business staff that would be taken out of their day-to-day work and requested to perform a percentage of their time to the project, some up to 50%, 60% of their time.
Priestley, does that address your question?
Yeah, I guess I was mostly wondering if there actually is a database and methods to be able to pull data on employees as needed, or if that's a manual process.
I hope this with our new ERP system that answer would be yes.
All right, thank you.
Okay. Any other immediate questions, comments, concerns?
We'd be going right, will we be adjourning at the end of the session?
So what I'd like to do is after the brief executive session is go back live for a committee discussion on the agenda for next month. And it sounds like we've heard two issues that we want to put on it. Doesn't have to be super in depth, but just make sure that folks out in YouTube land have as much notice as possible. So hopefully I'm open. Would you be agreeable to doing the executive session after a brief committee discussion on agenda? And you're welcome to stay in the chair if you'd like. So our next meeting is going to be December 5th from 1 to 4. So we've got a little bit less time than today. We'd like to hear from UI and ERP. Do we need to hear more on IEE again? I didn't hear any particular touch points that we needed to dig into.
No, I would, if I might,
Please.
I would love, I don't know how the rest of the committee feels, to just kind of hear an update on DMV at that point.
Okay. And maybe we could have some folks from DMV come in to speak to their experience too. And maybe they can give us some insight on how to make that positivity from that project translate to others.
Yeah, did I miss the memo on the 2-week closure? I mean, I saw that coming up this morning. Did we know that was going to happen?
Yeah, one of them at least sent an email to both transportation committees, and I know the NPR did some coverage of it.
Okay.
But
I don't recall seeing.
I don't think it went to all members.
I believe it's a couple of days. It's a couple of days. Yeah, there was a public announcement that went out a month ago,
Okay,
and they're continuing to communicate and evangelize that date.
great.
Rep. Priestley, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just wondering on the last session that we had, there was kind of a mention of agency of education projects, and I just didn't know, is that something we'll be checking in these meetings on, or?
Is that something you're
I don't
checking?
want at this point, there was a larger effort to create a shared financial system, but that wasn't working out, so they were keeping the district's supervisory unions that had migrated to it on it to an end of life, but other districts weren't. So as of right now, though, there are projects underway and there aren't projects that I'm monitoring.
Okay.
Email says November 8th through 14th. Spanning 2 weeks. But
It's just for one office.
Oh, just the one,
There
that makes
are-
sense.
I'm trying to pull it from JFO, but are there other projects that we should hear about in December?
This might be out in left field, but I have some questions about the campaign finance system. Under whose jurisdiction does that rest? And will it be updated as well?
Secretary of State's office is.
But where does that plug into the data world?
Are you talking about cyber security?
I'm talking about campaign finance systems that need modernizing. Just curious if that rests under any of your jurisdictions. I wasn't sure where that is.
It's Secretary of State's at this point.
Okay, so they have their own data person who does that? Okay, good to know. And we have not seen them and we won't.
Sweet.
But that presumably is under also your oversight function?
Our Chief Information Security Officer participates in that, in an advisory capacity, yes. But our project managers don't manage those projects.
Any oversight of it at all?
I'm
Just through the procurement process.
I'm sorry, I'm missing context.
The Secretary of State's campaign finance system modernization. So they do work their way through, in a procurement sense, a process that touches us and we review. But once the project is really in flight, we're not at this point providing project managers. We do provide our Chief Information Security Officer and it is the security analyst to it.
We previously started to do an assessment about cyber practices and accountability throughout state government, and the constitutional officers have their own processes. We did have several updates, I think, from former Secretary Condos related to election security for the last election as well. So I mean, we could certainly call them in to hear from them.
One of the things that we did several years ago is we asked your predecessor to create a document that listed effectively all of the systems throughout state government and who was responsible for their oversight and operation. It would be well perhaps for a future meeting to go back and take a look at that and determine and ask you to determine whether or not it should be updated so that we do have a clear picture of what systems are there in state government and who's responsible for them.
Yeah, an update on that.
So I don't know.
Which predecessor? Just,
It was Secretary Quinn.
it was Quinn.
Yes.
Okay.
And
We'll look into that.
I believe Secretary Naylor had a summary of that as well.
It wasn't up to date with everything to the best of my knowledge.
I believe it still was work in progress. Am I hearing that you'd like to hear from Secretary of State for December?
It doesn't seem like it's a big priority compared to everything else we have on our plate. I can certainly contact her personally with this constituents
Okay.
and, put that on.
And we can put that on for January. Hopefully we'll be able to meet more regularly.
Definitely interested too.
Okay. January or?
Yeah, whatever, but that's the fourth topic.
I saw your eyebrows go up, so I figured I'd check. Okay. Is there anything else that we want to put on the agenda for December at present?
Just the afternoon meeting, just 1 to 3, 1 to 4.
1 to 4, 3 hours. Okay.
Do you expect executive sessions that day?
Picturing the Monty Python, he expects to finish Inquisition.
I just that's worth if you need me.
Okay. I don't think so, unless we hear something in the next half hour that changes that. But. Okay. So with that, for people in attendance for the executive session, I think I'd like to have Lisa and Ledge Counsel stick with us. John, are you, I assume Secretary would ask John to stay, and yourself as well?
I serve everybody's pleasure.
Okay. Questions, comments? Concerns? Points? Okay.
For a taco.
So at the end of the executive session, we'll just adjourn the meeting. We don't need to go back on live. So we'll call it a day at that point. And we take a vote on the executive session. And anything else we need to specify on the open? What would you vote?
You should make a motion to enter into executive session for a specific purpose and just make sure that you limit your discussion on that purpose. And somebody will make a motion to exit executive session. And Shaggy is on his way. If Representative Priestley does want to stay on the line, he'll do an end-to-end version Zoom. So I think he's voluntarily if you want that option.
Okay. Does that need to be decided before we?
That doesn't need, oh, well,
Yeah.
yes, if you want to commence and have Representative Priestley participate, you have to wait for Patty to set up that remote.
So I think we should wait to make sure you have an opportunity.
Okay, so we'll plan on that. And
I'll make the motion to.
and we don't need to second that, right?
I'll second it.
Okay. And all those in favor of going into executive session for the purpose again, a risk assessment and
For a review of risk assessment, of risk oversight and threat assessment.
all those in favor, please say aye or raise your hand or virtual hand.
Aye.
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 Anybody opposed?